Hi, everybody. Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Priceless Advice with and for leaders of volunteers. Today, I am very, very happy to welcome first-time guest, and I just met at the Alive National Summit in March, Becky Blumer. And Becky is in Portland, Oregon, supporting people to transform themselves in their community through service. And the through line of your career, Becky, is community work, and she currently leads volunteer engagement efforts for a large library system in Portland. Prior to marrying her love for books and volunteer engagement through library work, she was the director of Hands On Greater Portland and a 16-year veteran of the organization. Becky has been a CVA, Certified Volunteer Administrator, since 2008. Welcome to the show, Becky Blumer. Yay!
Thanks, Dana. So happy to be here.
So we met at the first ever Alive National Summit in March, and we've both known Jen Forster for a long, long time.
Yes.
And I saw you on a panel with Faiza Vinzant and Nyla Abear, friends of the channel, friends in real life. They've been guests on the show. And I was so impressed with the panel and the topics, and I kind of background checked you through Jen. I was like, would it be cool if I had Becky on the show? She was like, oh my God, you have to have Becky on the show. I was like, let's have Becky on the show. So
So
here we
sweet.
are. Specifically about that panel was about real things that are happening in communities around volunteer engagement. You and I each deal with real world things and lots of theoretical high strategy stuff and national summits and conferences and things like that. But I really liked how grounded that panel was in kind of reminding all of us that it isn't always research papers and theories and ideas, that there's day-to-day stuff that sometimes we make assumptions about that isn't really the case anymore. And so how did you get involved with that panel? And do you want to talk more about the topics
Sure.
of that panel?
Yeah, I felt so lucky to be able to share space with Faiza and Nyla, both absolutely brilliant thinkers about our work. I think Faiza particularly has done just beautiful work helping to continue to professionalize our field. And I do serve on the CCVA board with FISA, so I feel very lucky to get to work with her so closely. And so she invited me to be on the panel with her and Nyla. It was my first time meeting Nyla, who is brilliant. Major shout out for the conference. I thought was just incredible. I was talking to one of my old coworkers from when I worked at Hands on Greater Portland, and I said, "How's it going?" He had asked me, like, "Should I go?" And I said, well, I don't know. They haven't had one before. You should try it. And so like mid-conference, I checked in with him and he said, you know what, Becky, I've never felt I was in the right place more than I have here. And I was like, that's beautiful. I'm so glad that you
Was
made
that by
it.
any chance our mutual friend John?
It was our mutual friend, John.
Yes.
Yeah, it was
Yay.
perfect. I was just like, yeah, it was so incredible to be with led by peers, sharing what we all know together and just like really lifting up all of our collective wisdom. I loved it. Anyway, that's a side note. So yeah, Faiza invited me to be on the panel. I love the opportunity to talk about like what is happening in our field. And I think, the thing that happened is I did some research before, of course, Faiza sent the questions and I thought, oh, I should do some research. And a lot of what I was seeing just did not reflect
Hmm.
what I've been experiencing as a volunteer manager. So I think that's really what grounded a lot of my comments. And so, I was seeing a lot of like articles about volunteers in AI and how we're doing that and like creating more remote opportunities. And that has not been my experience. In our library system, we do a screening interview for all of our adult volunteers, and nearly, I would say 90% of people that we've talked to, they want to volunteer in person, they want to
Hmm.
be connected, and
Yep.
they want to do something that feels like physical with working like in our spaces. When I looked up tips or like what's happening in our field, like none of that was represented, which I thought was really interesting. And when I asked that question to the room, everyone was like, yes, that's what we're seeing too, is like people looking for a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. I've had people say they want something that's not on their phone. They want something that's
Right.
not on a computer. So many, including myself, work from home. For the most part, I also do go into a lot of libraries, which is amazing and a great part of my job. But I think that people really they want to be in community. At least that's what we're finding. And, maybe that's specific to libraries, but I suspect seeing the response in the room that's actually that I think that a lot of people are looking for that right now.
I agree. And being in that panel and being at that summit was so important. The energy was, I think, very magical and new because it was a brand new event and a different size, a little under 300 people versus, Points of Light is like several hundred or
Hmm.
sometimes a couple thousand. I think that that's important to connect because we can get too high in orbital stuff. There's a national strategy that's been released that I'll be talking about in my own Tuesday tips this summer,
Yeah.
but not to be disconnected from that sense of, yeah, we wanted things to be accessible to people and create equity in, the digital divide, and that if you
Yep.
can't come in or you're still, COVID conscious or, have some other disability or just you've got kids or elder care at home and you do want to work at home, that those
Yep.
opportunities are potentially available. But I agree, and not just from the responses in that panel, but also working with clients and in real life, that yeah, that sense for human connection, especially in the age when AI is getting pushed so hard into
Yep.
every product that we didn't necessarily ask
Hmm.
it to be, and that we have more of that human connection and less of this virtual video. Is
Yep.
this a real video of a cougar asking a bicyclist to help its cubs? No, it is not. That's not a thing that happens. Let me tell you. I love that we were back and grounded in
Yep.
reality. And I've talked before about the fact that Faiza mentioned on that panel that when she moved from Toronto to Southern California, to outside of San Diego, that she was turned down for volunteering by like 14 different organizations.
Yeah.
And that feels like that shouldn't be a part of our reality for someone who is the executive director of CCVA. There are so many assumptions, I think, about how we do the work. And sometimes I've seen an emphasis on the form has to be this way or that way, or we have to, do a certain process. And I think that, that can be good and grounded. And there's a lot of people who don't know that as a resource. But I think what we heard in that panel with you and Faiza and Nyla and people in the room was that the day-to-day reality on the ground is that community connection, and let's not lose the human part
Yep.
and the connection and community part. Let's not trip over what the form looks like or delay or too many hoops. Is that kind of what you found in those conversations from that panel and since then?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking a lot about like what's changed since I started and what
Uh-huh.
hasn't changed. And, I think that a lot has changed. When I started with volunteer management, I actually did AmeriCorps in I think the second year that it was around, it was like 1999. And I was with I did Volunteer Montana. So I was like setting up a volunteer program at a rural school in Montana, which is where I grew up. And I think about like what did I learn then that I'm still doing right now? And then what's like radically different? Well, one, I think the technology is radically different, obviously. I don't we did not have a database. I think we wrote everything down, had like a three-ring binder, that kind of thing. So the
Bankers
technology,
boxes, boxes
yeah,
of
exactly.
papers. Yeah.
The way we actually kind of do the administrative side of the work, I think has really changed. But one of the things that I think has stayed 100% the same is that it truly is about making connections with people. So I think that, and with their humanity and like wanting to do good work. And, I always used to say, and I think this is true today, that, at the library where I work, it's like we can literally send an email to 3,000 people and ask them to show up for some kind of event or something specific that we need. Say we're recruiting a bilingual tech help person. We could send it out to our huge list and maybe get one person that responds. We have probably maybe 3,000 people on our list. Or we have a bilingual Spanish volunteer engagement specialist on my team. She could contact 3 to 4 people and probably get 2 to 3 of them to volunteer. So I think there still is that like real world connection. And I know that it is more than just a direct ask, but I do think that there is still so much when I look at our libraries and like when we're recruiting for like really specific positions, when we are out in the community meeting people, talking to people, really getting those one-on-one connections, that's where we find people. Because I think a lot of the times too, volunteers don't see themselves in a role that we could see them in. And so sometimes it's just like having that conversation to talk with people about, what kind of skills we're looking for, what they'd like to do, what their time is, and then really like making those connections. So I think like at the heart of it, I really still feel like our profession is so much about relationship building and relationship management. And I don't think how we do that has changed a little bit, but I think that the that kind of underpinning that is that we're still in the business of connecting with people and connecting their good intention with an opportunity that we have that might fit what they're looking for.
There's also a phenomenon in the age of the internet, not just of it's kind of like what used to be called the factory dilemma in, assembly lines of like, oh, well, I missed putting my part in, but someone else will catch it down the line. If you send out to a list of 3,000 people and one or two are answering back, but an in-person conversation can get you twice that, three or
Yep.
four people or two or three times that, that supports that high touch, human
Hmm.
connection, because I think it's too easy for someone to get an email and go, someone else will do that, if they don't have that immediate
Yep.
recognition of like, oh, I really, really want to do that, versus
Hmm.
that if someone, especially who speaks their language or is
Yep.
bilingual or is already connected to their community that they know in
Hmm.
real life, there's
Yep.
going to be a lot more trust for someone in real life. We all get so many emails all day, and we know as leaders and volunteers, we try not to spam our groups or our email
Yes.
lists and give them, important information. But sometimes there is a call to action or an ask or a
Hmm.
request for a specific skill set. And I think what is most effective is just combining those things. Like, yeah, you put an email out and maybe someone's like, I've been waiting for someone to ask me that my
Hmm.
whole life.
Right.
Maybe, kind of a small chance, but maybe. But those conversations where, oh, do you realize that if we
Yeah.
add you four in to help with translations and help with community boothing or outreach, they're like, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, I'll talk to my community,
Yep.
because they may not understand that, oh, am I being asked to translate legal documents? Like, what's the real
Yeah.
ask in there?
Yeah.
And that conversation, I think, helps ground and clarify that in that human connection that, we're asked things digitally all the
Yep.
time. We're asked
Yep.
for digital response, and it gets really exhausting. But that human connection, I think,
Mhm.
helps energize people into
Yes.
that action.
Yeah, we found that a lot too when I worked at Hands on Greater Portland because we operated on a volunteer leader model. And, we would have, so we had volunteer leaders that would lead our community projects. And, it was interesting because I think we were constantly trying to recruit for new leaders. And it
Mhm.
was always really fascinating that, like, I think maybe that word leadership, I don't know what it was, but sometimes it would keep people from, they just didn't see themselves that way. And then, we could go to someone that's like, you'd be incredible in this position. You've like been, you're like the heartbeat of this project. You've been out here a bunch of times and, we're looking for a volunteer leader. And then they'd be like hesitant, and then we would talk to like, what does that mean? And honestly, that was how we got a lot of our leaders was that, because I think they just like didn't automatically see themselves in that position. And then once we could talk about it, make that connection, they were like, oh, okay, I feel like I could do that. I could give that a try.
And I think, I've talked a lot in this channel and in workshops about setting volunteer leaders up for success with that kind of support and
Hmm.
check-in, because another thing that I've noticed can happen, and I've made this mistake in my past career myself, is like, oh, I'm an extrovert. I'm fine stepping up to the plate. What about the
Yeah.
ambiverts and introverts and everyone
Yeah.
else on the spectrum that isn't as fed
Mhm.
by audience,
Yep.
attention or adoration, or doesn't have any stage fright? That word leaders can mean just like responsibility. And so
Yep.
if there are someone who has a lot of other responsibilities in their life, and maybe they come to volunteer to feel that connection and community in like a more equal sense of like, we're here doing this together, I think that can be intimidating. That's like, we think you'd be great for a leadership role. Some ways that I started to reframe this, and I don't know if see if you have too, is we really value your expertise. Could you help us by leading this team? They're not necessarily being pegged as like the leader just right
Yeah.
out the gate. They're the expert. that can then teach others. And, let's use your experience on this team and doing, these roles and responsibilities and tasks to do that. And so getting someone comfortable in that role, I think, is a way better than just pushing someone into it or having only the loudest voices
Yep.
join who may not
Hmm.
have the depth of expertise but have confidence, whether it's earned or not. The larger personalities among us stepping
Yeah.
up to the plate. What other things have you seen change in the last 10, 20 years as far as how volunteers are even relating to each other or relating to staff? Have you noticed some differences there?
I have noticed a few differences. Side note, I do want to say, if you are an
Yes.
introvert, the library is your place
Oh,
because
absolutely.
I'm an
Oh, yeah.
extroverted person. So I have to say, moving to the library setting has like given me a large appreciation for leadership from like an introverted position because we are full of introverts. And
But we've also had such cultural and political shifts in the last 20 years. Are you noticing, like, are there more tensions with volunteers and staff? Are people pretty chill once they get to know each other, which has kind of been my experience? Like, what
Mhm.
are you noticing anything with the other changes that have happened in the United States in the last like 10, 20 years, not
Yeah.
just technology? How are people relating to each other or even relating to the idea of authority or leadership in an
Mhm.
organization in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it is interesting. I think you're right. Like I've definitely seen a lot of like once we're here together, we figure out how to work together. And I think like being in a library space specifically, like we really are one of the places where you can be inside and with everyone. Like, because
Hmm.
truly, like our spaces do belong to everybody in the community, and that means everybody. I have that just unique view of seeing people get along and over that shared interest. So I haven't seen that as
Yeah.
much. I definitely have seen people like I feel like people do come together in the space and they have that shared identity around the work that we're trying to do and the mission, and people tend to be working together forward, which I think is great and has been nice to see. And I do think it is a place where we all can meet each other. I think one of the things that I have seen change, or that maybe this is just my own personal thing, is wanting to see like kind of moving from a space of like mutual aid, and that means mutual, so
Right.
I feel like when I started there was more this kind of sense of I volunteer to help you. Like
Yeah.
you're needy, I'm helper.
Right.
And I feel like that has changed. I'm feeling some change around that, which I
I
think is
agree.
great.
Hmm.
And I think for a long time I've really wanted to say like, you get something out of this too. And so like one of the things that I like to do when I'm interviewing people is, my first question is like, why'd you apply? And they always say like, I love the library, I love books, I grew up, all the things. And I was like, hey, me too. That's why I'm here. And then I always like to say, tell me some other reasons why you're here. Like, what do you want to get out of this? And I think this idea that we're just supposed to be these like helpful people that all we want to do is help and there's nothing in it for ourselves. I think it's false, and I think that we're all here for a reason. And I feel like that was always true, but maybe we had to hide it a little bit more. And I feel like I like the reciprocity that I'm seeing. And I think that a lot of that is also kind of influenced by mutual aid, which I think is really like bringing to the forefront that it's like we all need help at
Right.
some point and we all give help at some point. And I've enjoyed seeing that change because I think it's really important. Like I think no one wants to like we all have something to give. And thinking about even just like volunteering in like sheltering spaces
Hmm.
where like during COVID where people are like, I want to volunteer too. People that were using the shelter, I was like, great,
Yeah.
like let's talk about what that could look like. And not like you have to, because not everybody is set up to do that. So no
Right.
mandatory, like you have to do this to be in this space, but it's like, hey, if you're here and you want to help too, like we can also figure out a way to make that work. So that's a change that I've really loved kind of witnessing, I think, over my career.
Yeah, I think going from that patronizing or previous
Mhm.
colonial mindset of, we are the saviors of this
Mhm.
underprivileged community that
Mhm.
we've also been the ones to historically exclude from
Yes.
opportunities, but now we're going to come in with corporate t-shirts on and save the day. And I think that sense, we've definitely seen a buildup of more mutual aid and informal
Mhm.
volunteering and that sense of community from, I think, some practical aspects. One, the slashing of whatever little social safety net the USA has ever had has definitely been diminishing over the years.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I also think it's so important that libraries are pretty much the last third space, the public
Yeah.
space where it's free to do something. We're getting charged to have apps as like the
Yeah.
middle step to just connect with something we used to be able to connect with, and that can be fine, again, like crossing a digital divide or making things
Hmm.
more accessible to people. But having a space where you can show up, you can be in community, you can learn from each other, you can help
Hmm.
each other. And for me, working fairly closely with mutual aid groups in San
Hmm.
Francisco and other areas in the Bay Area, I can drive my friend to the airport today. Next month, they can drive me to the
Yep.
airport. I can help my
Yep.
friend move for, pizza and soda. Then when
Hmm.
I need to move a couch, my friends can step up. Like that's
Hmm.
real community. That's
Yeah.
mutual aid is I help you now.
Hmm.
I'm here for you now. I might need your help later on versus that top-down hierarchical
Yeah.
one way of like, oh no, we're going to just trickle down the help. Or sometimes the greater philosophy of philanthropy, which we don't really want to pay, a wealth tax or taxes,
Yeah.
but we'll decide which charities are our favorites to go to. So,
Hmm.
there's still those kind of obsolete or old-fashioned or just not very adaptive, not genuinely helpful mindsets that can exist in the nonprofit space. But seeing library as one of the last really equitable community
Yep.
gathering places, have you had any kind of like eureka moments or insights from working with folks and projects in the library where, oh, we're doing this thing and I have my assumptions about it, but oh, again, kind of back to the panel topics, like what are the assumptions of your own that are getting broken, or assumptions maybe from these big research institutes
Hmm.
or things like points of light. They're like, we did this study, but what does it really mean on the ground? Like, what are some of those stereotypes you think that are breaking down these days?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've seen in a big way is that this idea that people don't want to make a commitment.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
all of our volunteer positions at our library, except for like very, very few, like a handful of we've just been opening some new branch locations. And so we do like a 1 day event or a 2 day event. But other than that, every single thing we do is ongoing.
Yeah.
So it's like weekly, I kind of hear like, oh, people aren't willing to commit. They don't want to do that. It has to be one and done. And we're not seeing that at all. In
Mm-mm.
fact, we're hearing people say like, I really love this. And it's not for everybody. I do think
Right.
there are people that need the one and done. All of it is good.
Right.
Uh,
It all
every
balances
avenue
out.
we have, right? Every driving people to the airport, doing mutual aid, I think that's all really important. And I do think that there is space for people that want to do something ongoing because I hear people say, like, for me, it works better if I know I have it every week
Yeah.
because this is something I want to make space for in my life. And the way that I do that is through routine. And so we get a lot of people that are really interested in making ongoing commitments. I mean, we have people that have been volunteering with us for years,
Hmm.
15, 20, thousands of hours that, that
Decades and
people have built
decades.
up. Yeah, literally over like 2 to 3 hours a week. That's something that I'm definitely seeing that kind of goes against like conventional wisdom. Also, that we have a lot of teens that volunteer. So,
Hmm.
like I feel like generationally, we kind of see a lot of teens want this or teens want that. And same, we get teens that volunteer to come every week that are making, and I think that they're less in control of their schedules and they can be a little bit more fluid. And I think that people are willing to make that commitment. Another thing that we're seeing too is just that a lot of our teens like really represent like the wide diversity in our community around languages spoken. I think in our volunteer engagement efforts. I can't remember the exact number, but I think we're around like 38% of volunteers are fluent in a language in addition to English. We're just seeing lots of like cultural and language representation in our volunteer pool. And I think that kind of goes against this idea that the people that volunteer for libraries are like retired white ladies. And
Hmm.
yes, there are going to be some retired white ladies. I may be one of them someday.
We can
And
only
I
hope to retire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's so much broader than that. And I think we kind of sell ourselves short when we're like, we think it's just like one thing and it's actually can be so much more. And I think that we can limit our own engagement thinking like, no one will want to do this. This is too technical. I mean, we just opened a professional recording studio in one of our libraries and people were like, no one's going to want to do that for free. Well, it turns out we have a bunch of people that are like, wow, this is amazing. I want to use my specific skill set to help people learn how to record a podcast or create an album. Or, it's been, I want to spend that 2 hours here, 2 hours there. And I also work as a professional that does this, but I want to do this at the library too, because the library reaches everybody and that matters to me. So I think part of it is like asking for what we need and seeing what the community has to offer and seeing if there's some place in between. And not everything's going to work, right? We have things we recruit for that no one wants to do and that, but I think we have to kind of think about like not limiting what we do based on our own assumptions of who wants to do what.
And I think a core thing that gets forgotten sometimes in, higher levels of
Yeah.
of volunteer engagement or research is that if you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly.
If you don't ask, you don't get. And so if there's something that's harder to recruit for, either you got to adjust the ask, maybe it needs to be
Mhm.
more transparent. I have the famous example, which I'll link to, of the penguins at the penguin chick socializers at the San Francisco Zoo, which on paper is like everyone wants to cuddle penguin chicks. It's cold, it's smelly, it's wet. They poop on you, they sneeze on you. It's physically rather unpleasant. You're going to ruin the clothes you're in. So like we need some more transparency, but then people could self-select and be like, now that I understand the assignment, I can dial in and wear grubby clothes or a poncho or whatever, and we
Yeah.
can make some adjustments to make them more comfortable. If there's something that is you're having trouble recruiting for, either the description isn't quite
Mhm.
hitting right or it's not in front of the correct audience yet. Like it
That's
hasn't
right.
reached the people that
Yeah.
maybe have, again, specifically for like music or whatever else that have that skill set. Now I
Mhm.
want to stop by your library on the way down and play in the recording studio because I've got one in sort of one in my house, but I'm sure it's not decked out that way. But as
Amazing.
as a musician, and I've been like secretly making my little tunes that no one will ever hear. In that library setting, direct community connection. We talked about, some of the things that came up on the panel at the Alive National Summit. What were some of the things that surprised you the most out of that panel discussion? Because there were maybe like, 50, 60 people in the room, other than that FISA got turned down to volunteer by over a dozen places. But yeah, what were some of those light bulb moments from that panel?
I think sometimes a conversation that we're having around creating equity, inclusion, and access in our volunteer engagement efforts does still surprise me because I feel like sometimes we're having the same conversation over and over again and saying, like, well, I sent this out to the Black community and no one showed up. And I'm thinking, like, why we're still doing this? So I think that was a surprise to me a little bit, that I think that think there's part of me that thinks sometimes we're further along in understanding that representation matters, that people want to work in places and volunteer in places where they are reflected and they see themselves, that something's not getting done for them or to them. So like some of those conversations I think always surprise me a little bit because I feel like in my own work, I've just seen a lot of change around that. And there's still so far to go. Like I'm not at all saying
Always. Yeah.
that we are where we need to be. And I'm surprised that I think sometimes that I see practitioners that are still trying to figure out like, okay, well, we can't get anyone that speaks Spanish. And it's like, well, do you have a Spanish language application? Do you have anyone that speaks
Right.
Spanish on your team? Do you have other Spanish speaking volunteers? Are people going to feel welcome and a part of that community? That was a little surprising in some of the conversations. Of course, yes, I was surprised that FISA couldn't find a place and also not,
Right. Yeah.
I
There's
think
two.
there
Yeah.
is part of me that thinks that we're still in recovery mode. I even think about in our own engagement efforts around we're not back to where we were. Like I still like I feel like we're still like trying to figure out how to like, and maybe there is no equilibrium at this point, probably, but I still feel like we're kind of not at the same level of engagement. And a lot of it has changed.
Hmm.
But I still think that there are a lot of places that are still like kind of opening back up and refiguring out how to engage volunteers. And hopefully they're doing that in a way that's like really mindful around like, what do we actually need? Or is this a good time to like really reflect on what we've been doing and potentially change it?
The thing that we're up against as leaders of volunteers or larger voices in the space
Mhm.
or the sector,
Yeah.
on advisory committees or helping with national strategies or whatever, is that Tony Goodrow actually used to own Better Impact,
Mhm.
had said years ago, and I agree with this, that VMS companies really they aren't really competing against each other. They're competing with people who don't know that volunteer management software exists.
Exactly.
And so on the non-technological level,
Yeah.
we tend to have the same conversations with the same of us in the same groups and the same choirs
Hmm.
who mostly agree with each
Yeah.
other. What's happening is the reality on the ground that I experience over and over again, getting new
Hmm.
clients who realize we need help with this,
Yes.
and just talking to colleagues like you and others, that so many nonprofits, they don't know there's a thing that's a CVA that their director of
Hmm.
volunteers can get. They don't know that there's conferences about it. They don't know that there's Alive, or up in Canada where
Yeah.
I am today, VMPC. They don't realize that there are so many free resources, Idealist, which is Absorbed Volunteer
Hmm.
Match,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of I'm
Hmm.
siloed, I'm in it by myself, I have to
Hmm.
figure out everything from scratch. That's what I think we're up against, is just
Yes.
getting a brand recognition that
Yep.
there's professional volunteer engagement as a
Hmm.
career, and there's not just the CVA, but some other professional standards that are, always evolving and trying to keep up.
Yep.
But there's so many people that are so resource strapped that it is still Excel sheets or bankers
Yep.
boxes, and they can't even comprehend there's help and there's support out there, and getting the information out there to our colleagues that of course
Mhm.
people are not understanding that there's an easier way to do things, and that there's plenty of help and support, not
Mhm.
just in professional organizations, but
Yep.
local dovias or just colleague to colleague. And seeing that blossom, and seeing that education grow among the sector
Mhm.
is satisfying, but you still absolutely run up against, there were at least 14 organizations that didn't have time or didn't care enough or didn't know that you have to get back to people, or weren't able to get back
Yeah,
to
that's
FISA
right.
in time, out of the ones that, she did eventually go work with. Like
Hmm.
there's, maybe there's a 1 to 15 ratio of ones that know, or 1 to 20 or
Yeah.
worse, of ones that know what's going on
Mhm.
versus ones that aren't. And for the positive changes that you've seen in your community about like breaking down these assumptions and what we were talking about in the panel, what would be some of your words of wisdom, priceless advice, closing thoughts for our audience today, of just staying grounded in their practices and helping build that sense of community space and belonging that we all seem to be, really craving so much, not just because
Yeah.
of the impacts of COVID and the, political and economic impacts of our modern times, but, what's really kept you going, and seeing
Yeah.
what you've seen others, keeping them going and inspired by.
That's such a great question. I mean, I think for me, I've been in the field for a really long time. I've gone kind of up and down and around like, well, I can't learn anything new. And like, honestly, I think I feel so supported. Like I've in such a rich community of people. And I'm so grateful that for my volunteer service that I've done through being on the CVA board. I also participate in a weekly, I don't make it every week just because of my schedule, but there's a weekly group of librarian or volunteer engagement folks that work in libraries that meet weekly and have since the pandemic. We have a standing time every week on Wednesdays where people can come. Also, if you're a library person, please reach out and we can get you connected to that group. And we meet and we share topics and we share resources because I think that we so often are, the one of one in our organization. I always say, sometimes I say like we're the stepchild, people like don't even know what we're doing.
The second
Um,
cousin of the second cousin.
Exactly. And then there's stepchild. And I think it's not, and I say that in a way that's like playful because I don't think it's intentional. Like I
Right.
think people view the importance but also I think that sometimes we're just doing our thing. We make it look easy and they don't, they're not really thinking about that sense of community. So I'm so grateful for that sense of community. Often I'm workshopping with other professionals in the field around like how do you approach this, or do you have a position description for this, or have you ever tried to engage a volunteer in this position? Did it work? What kind of issues are you seeing? Like I think that that is all entering into that space of feeling like we've all got something still to learn. Things are really changing right now. As much as like some of those stuff has stayed the same, I think there's a lot that's changing and great time to be connected. And like you said, there's so many free resources to do that. So many. One of the things that I did reflect on at the conference, which made me a little sad, was just feeling that, just kind of hearing this, like a lot of folks feeling like they're not respected in their roles or volunteer engagement is like an afterthought. I'm so grateful that is not my experience. Like am treated like a professional. I feel like I'm fairly compensated, all of the things that a professional should feel in their position. And, my manager said she recognizes that I bring an expertise that she doesn't have. She's the HR person, so she has a lot of expertise in that, and she knows some of what I do, but that I do play this really unique role that is a professional role that requires expertise, and I want that for everyone. And I think part of that is like connecting with your peers, finding them, showing up into spaces and like lifting each other up, like mutual aid in our own realm.
Yeah, mutual aid in our personal lives and that
Yeah,
human connection that with the same practices we want to expand and inform and educate people from and share the wisdom in the room,
yeah,
share information seamlessly,
yes,
and as much as we can. I think that that only makes it better, and that's part of why I started this channel as a free channel.
I
Not
love it.
not behind a paywall. It's like I want this information and these conversations to get out to as many people as it possibly can and be shared by as many people, and to take these ideas and run with them. It's not a precious IP that we're holding on to that only a
Exactly.
corporation has access to. It's like no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. We need that sense of mutual aid
Hmm.
at the personal level, on the professional level, because it's really mutual benefit is what it is.
Yeah.
It's we're sewing up the social safety net for each other when
Hmm.
other leaders in other positions are failing at that. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad to have your priceless advice, your insight, your wisdom, your humor on the show today, Becky. And I'll put your LinkedIn contact
Perfect.
information so people
Great.
can connect. I think so.
So,
And everyone, get your library card, get Canopy on your TV streaming. Support your local libraries.
exactly.
It's the final free public space that we all pay for and we all deserve to enjoy. So thank you so much, Becky, for being on the show, and everyone else. Like, subscribe, join the Cool Kids Club, and find Becky on LinkedIn for more great information. Thanks, everyone. Take care.